In the last video, we made use of the useState hook inside of our functional component. We're now going to dissect this line of code and get a really good idea of what's going on. The first thing I want to cover is exactly what syntax you see right here. So this is what we refer to as array destructuring. We've already seen many examples of object property destructuring throughout this course. So for example, we've seen examples of writing out code like curly braces resource from this.state. Now, I don't actually want to write out that line of code right here. That's just a quick example. Remember, this line right here is going to look at the this.state object. It would then pull off the resource property because we have the curly braces right here and assign that resource value to the variable of resource. So a very similar thing is happening on this line right here, but it's making use of destructuring for an array instead. Let's flip back over to our browser and I'll give you a very quick example of exactly what's going on there. All right, so inside of my console, I'm going to define a new array called colors, and I'll give this a value of red and green like so. Now, if I wanted to access both of those values right there and assign each of them to a variable, I could do something like const myColor1 equals colors at 0. That's totally permissible. I could also do myColor2 equals colors at 1. And now I have myColor1 and myColor2 as well. But another way that I could get access to each of those elements and assign them to some variable inside of a single line of code would be to use that array destructuring. So I could write out const myColor3 and myColor4. And I'm going to take those values out of the colors array. So now whatever is inside of that first index right there will be assigned to myColor3, and whatever is inside that second index will be assigned to myColor4. So if I run that, I can then reference myColor3 or myColor4. So again, destructuring is just going to look at the first element, the second element inside the colors array, and assign them to this variable and this variable. So that's what's going on with the syntax you see right here. When we call useState, it's going to return an array with two elements inside of it. We're going to take the first element out of that array and assign it to the variable resource. We'll then take the second element inside the array and assign it to the variable setResource. All right, so now that we understand that syntax, let's now break down what the real meaning of each of these different variables is. So, quick diagram right here. All right, so I took that entire line of code and I broke it down into little individual segments. So we now understand what those square brackets are doing on the left-hand side of the equal sign. So what's going on with the first element inside that array? The first element is what we might refer to as current value. Now, in truth, we can refer to these different variables with any variable name we want. So it's not like object destructuring where we have to use the exact name of a property. We can call this right here resource, or we could call it my resource, or it can be my state, or it can be selected thing to show. Whatever you want to call it, it is totally up to you. There's no requirements on how we name a variable when we are making use of array destructuring. I just figured that a name of resource made a lot of sense in this context. That first element of current value right there contains the present value of some piece of state inside of our component. So current value means exactly the current value. It's whatever this current piece of state is equal to. The second element inside that array is going to be a setter function. It's a function that allows us to update the value of this piece of state. It's equivalent to calling setState inside of a function-based component. Now on the right-hand side, we've got the useState function, and then inside there, we provided an initial value for this piece of state. Now this entire line right here has some very close analogies to the component level state inside of a class that you are already very familiar with. So we can really think of current value right here being the same as referring to this.state.resource. This is the current value for some piece of state. The setter function is the same as calling this.setState with some update to make to our state object. And then the initial value over here is the same as when we initialized our state object inside of a constructor or as an instance property on our class when we had said something like resource is posts. Now, the one entire kind of confusing thing about the useState function is that when we were making use of a class-based component, we put all of our state into an object. Remember, as a quick example, up here, I'm going to put down class app, and we had something like state is resource, and that was like post or something like that. So inside of a class-based component, our state was an object that had a bunch of different values inside of it. But when we make use of the useState hook, we instead usually just store the single value that we care about. So in our case, inside of this app component right here, we don't really have to maintain an object that has a resource property. Instead, all you and I really care about is just the string posts. So when we make use of the useState hook, we kind of move away from an object containing all of our state to just the individual values themselves. The reason for this is that we can call useState as many times as we wish. So if we wanted to have some other piece of state inside of our application called maybe counter or something like that, we could start off a counter at 0. We would have our current count, and we could have our set count like so as well. If we were doing this with a class-based component, we would instead do something like, oh yeah, I want to have my resource property, and I also want to have some count property that starts off as 0 as well. So again, inside of a class-based component, we've got an object-based state. Inside of a functional component, we have these kind of individual values instead. All right, so I'm going to clean that up. And I'm going to delete the second useState right there. So now we're left with just resource and set resource along with useState. All right, so that's what's going on with this line right here. Again, we've got the initial value, we've got a function that we can use to update our data, and we've got the current piece of data right here as well. So we can make use of all these different values inside of here as we would with usual state inside of a class-based component. As you might guess, anytime we call set resource, as we do right here, that's going to cause our component to automatically re-render. When the component automatically re-renders, anything we pass into set resource is then going to be assigned to the variable resource over here. So in other words, if we call set resource with to-dos, the entire app component is going to re-render itself, and resource is going to contain the string to-dos instead. And that's why when we print out resource, we see the string of to-dos. All right, so that's just a little bit on the useState hook. Now there's still a lot more to learn about all this hook stuff, so let's take a quick pause right here, and we'll continue in the next video.